The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.
Kristina, how are you today?
I am well. How are you today? Am I allowed to say it's your birthday?
Yeah, of course you can. Yes, it's an auspicious day. The universe cracked open many years ago, and here I am. But in either case, today what we're going to do is as a follow-up to our introduction, where we explain the ABCs of leadership. We're going to focus today on only one, the first one, alignment.
Yeah.
And each one of these is a challenge as you face that phase of whatever you're trying to do as a leader. And keep in mind, we're talking to leaders who are dealing in the real world. This is an artsy-fartsy. These are people dealing with real-world problems, real-world issues, and they may have a deep-seated conviction and belief about what's important to them, and they may align themselves with some of the tenets of conscious capitalism or principled business. Yet at the same time, the world doesn't necessarily agree. It's going to challenge that. It's kind of like, the universe goes, oh, really? You believe in that? Let's see how you take this one on. And so, the way you and I have been talking is that there's always the personal side of leadership, what an individual has to go through to sort of really understand and discover their humanity and deal with their strengths, but also deal with their shadow side, what could be perceived as weaknesses. And then organizationally, how does this work in terms of the culture? And so let's start with the individual. I think the starting point will be for you to explain a little bit about how alignment works for an individual leader as they prepare themselves to then take it to their team and move forward with the next phase. So it's all yours.
All right. So I'll explain that. And I love that, Fred. Thank you. I think we're going to talk about personal and then the business. And then we're also going to talk about some of these principles that we base our lives on as well. I think that that's an important kind of aspect of this because we're like, base it on good principles. What are the examples of these? So personal. When I work with someone, one of the things that I find more so than anything, I have a system of being able to kind of talk with someone and look to see how kind of big they see themselves. All right. And I'm not talking about physical body. I'm not talking about anything like that. It's on their day to day, as they are looking through life, are they sitting in their personal story or are they sitting in a much bigger version, a much bigger story, a cosmic story, whatever you want to call it, with this idea that the personal story is something that keeps us very small for the most part, energetically, and it keeps us very limited because for the most part, the personal story has a trouble moving out of the drama triangle. We've mentioned the drama triangle of the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer, and moving between these different things. It's really based on principles that say, I'm weak, I'm small, I'm a victim, or I'm an abuser, or something like that. And it's a very limited version. And energetically, that looks very small. It feels very small. Yeah?
Yeah, so let's touch base a little bit about that, feeling small versus feeling big, so that people get a better understanding of it. Because if it's not really about sort of size, it's almost like a state of being.
Yes.
It's, and you mentioned the Cartman triangle, and, you and I have talked a lot about victimization.
Yes.
And it's easy for an individual to enter a state of victimhood. It's one of those, why me? Something happens and it's not what you want it to happen. And so it's why me, and it becomes an obstacle, and people can get into a real pity party. So it sounds like part of this, how big are you? It's almost like, can you rise above your circumstance and enter some aspect of yourself where you see a different possibility other than what you think is really in front of you? Because sometimes that's an illusion. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. One of my favorite sayings is you have to get the right altitude to be able to have the right attitude. Right? Because right? Because what you're saying is it's all about perspective. It's all about perspective. What this understanding is that if you're small, you see yourself as just an individual sitting in this one circumstance. You've been pushed along your life from one thing to the next, and here you are finding yourself in this, and you have no control over it. And poor me, I have to kind of be pushed into another circumstance, and I have you get a little bit bigger. And then you start to see, maybe I wasn't always the victim. Maybe I'm actually sometimes the persecutor. Maybe sometimes I'm the rescuer. That altitude gives you a little bit more perspective to say, I can switch this around. And then
so it's a sense of, it's almost like that point of disconnection that some people feel, where they feel alone and not connected to something bigger than they are. I love that great Rumi quote that is, I'm not a drop in the ocean, I'm the ocean in a drop. And if you get to that state, you are connected and you are then therefore bigger. You recognize you're part of a bigger, I don't know what you want to call it, a force or whatever it may be, the universe. You're in because we're talking about alignment, right? You're trying to get aligned with a thing that rises above circumstance, rises above victimhood, and gets into a little bit more of being a victor.
Right.
I'm not powerless. I have options. I have choices, and I can take action.
Right, right. And so if we were to use a plane, since we're saying altitude and attitude, right, which are obviously plane, plane terminology, aeronautical terminology, we can recognize that when we're sitting on the ground in an airplane, we're very limited in our ability to move, to be able to see. It's just like all we can see is maybe in one direction, right? As soon as you get up into this bigger kind of version of yourself and you get a greater perspective, you can pitch this way and that, you can roll, you can do whatever you want. You have a lot more mobility of being able to change your perspective and recognize that you're not stuck in, you're not stuck in a kind of two-dimensional plane sitting as a plane on a runway. You have so much more maneuverability and ability to change your perspective on things. And ultimately, when we talk about alignment, we're talking about, okay, I've had these same principles, and these principles are based on a personal story, right? They're based on a personal story, which usually means that they are based on a story of being a victim or a rescuer or a persecutor. They're based on a foundation of avoidance of pain, right? That's effectively all the Cartman drama triangle talks about is how are you passing pain on or trying to avoid pain, right? Pain and conflict, pain and challenge, things along those lines. So when you're in a personal story and you're creating a strategy and you're finding principles, you're going to find stuff like, I should always be alone. Or you're going to find something that says, my emotional, I can't be too sensitive. I'm going to not be sensitive anymore, right? I'm going to shut off all my emotions. Or you're going to find something that says, my opinion doesn't matter. I'm just going to always relinquish to whatever anybody else wants. Or you're going to do any of these things that basically create their strategies that are based on a principle that says, well, if I'm alone, then I'm going to avoid pain, right? And so you can see how a principle gets created. It creates a strategy, and then you're sitting in this personal story and you have no ability to move your perspective. Yeah,
that seems to me like a belief, a self-limiting belief that you're powerless. I mean, because we're talking about leaders who have positions of authority. But it doesn't mean they have all the answers. And I've seen leaders get into this belief that they have to have all the answers, that they can't ask for help, that they can't admit that they don't know what to do. And in the world we live in, which I like to call a whitewater world of ever-changing, class 5 waves, like, oh my God, the rock's coming and I'm going to hit it. And that's where the fear comes in, because it's just this constant uncertainty. Like I say, nowadays we're kind of a tweet away from disaster. That even though you have a position of authority and responsibility, you're still a human being. And you have to somehow have the inner strength and confidence that you can move forward. And, I deal with a lot of CEOs, and it's funny, the mature ones have no problem saying I need help because I can't have the answers for everything. No one's that smart. Yes. And neither am I. I just have a different perspective. And we put 1 + 1 together, you might get 3. But the ones that get paralyzed, because I work also with several CEOs who can make a decision at all. I mean, they're just stuck. And the team's waiting, like with bated breath. What do you want us to do? And they just can't move forward in any way, shape, or form because they feel isolated. They think they have to make all the decisions on their own. They don't want to go to the board and admit they don't know what they're doing for fear of some sort of negative retribution. And they don't want to go to their subordinates and say, I don't know what I'm doing for fear of losing face or something like that. And in this case, who is the rescuer? Is it something that happens individually, or is it that process of reaching out to say, I need help from someone, not to so much rescue in the classic sense, I'm drowning, please rescue me, but help me, aid me. And who could that be for an individual who's in a leadership role?
That's absolutely true, right? Because we recognize that being able to recognize that you're better when you're connected, right, is a principle that we recognize. We are social beings, right? We are meant to not do everything, right? Like no one person is supposed to be an island or an army, right? We're supposed to, and so we recognize that when when we get that altitude to be able to see and kind of get into a bigger perspective, that we're able to recognize that actually, I could do this, but this isn't, I'll use an example this isn't my zone of genius, right? Like, I don't want to do this one thing. I don't want to do this. And somebody else is better at doing this. And I'm okay with relinquishing the limiting belief that I have to have the answer for everything. And that my answer is the best answer, right? Those are all common strategies that we see that show up particularly in a business setting that says, well, I have to know everything and I have to appear as if I know everything. And if I don't, then I can't appear vulnerable at all. And
exactly.
Yeah. And so
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, and I've seen it and I've experienced it. How long does this take? I mean, because at the end of the day, you got to move on, right? You got a business to run. Does this happen in 30 minutes? Does it happen in 30 days? I mean, maybe that's the wrong question, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, because it's a process. You just don't sit there for 5 minutes and say, oh, I got this. I'm no longer terrified. There's a forward momentum that I can begin to build from. How does that work?
It's a great question, because effectively, to your point of limiting beliefs, we're moving from a limiting, like, we're calling it a principle because when it's in its maladaptive form, it's a limiting belief. And then eventually it turns into a limitless belief because it's kind of aligned with a principle of the universe that
I like that. I like that. You go from limiting belief to limitless belief. Love that. That's a great line. And so that transformation, that epiphany, and alignment with higher principles, not outdated beliefs, maladaptive beliefs. What principles are we talking about getting aligned with that we can sort of point to say that's what you need to focus on?
Right. So I want to get to that, but I want to make sure real quick too that I say that, like, when you say, I want to answer your question directly about how much time it is. I think that's why the ABCs are such an important concept, because you can immediately align with one of these principles that we're about to talk about. You can immediately do that, right? You can be like, oh, the universe is neutral. An example of one of these things. Oh, the universe is neutral. And then you have to practice that, which is the balance part to me, right? And then you have to get in the thick of it, even though you've been practicing. It's like running a marathon. It's like, if you want to use that as the example that we're talking about, the decision to say that you're capable of running a marathon is a limitless belief. It's a more limitless belief, right? It's not like, oh, I'm too tired, I'm too old, I can't do that. You can make that in a second. You can align with the idea that you can run a marathon, but then you have to practice to actually to do the balance part, and then you have to actually run it, which is the coherence part. So we'll get into all that later, but yes. Right, that's the way I kind of see it, right? Is it's like it can be an instant in aligning, and for some people, when they align with a more limitless belief, they get it resonates through their whole body, and you're like, oh God, that's a relief, right?
All right. So I get it. So it's a longer process. We know that running a marathon is a long process, but the decision to run the marathon can happen instantly. The decision to change your circumstance to rise above it could be instantaneously, a big epiphany, and now you got to go take action. So that explains it. So it's not an issue that alignment takes 30 minutes or 30 days. Alignment could happen rather quickly if you are reaching out for the aspirational aspects of oneself, to show that you're actually very powerful. You're not a victim. You can rise above the situation.
Yes,
that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes, you've risen above. You found the right altitude. You are aligning with a more limitless, loving, and integrated form of viewing yourself. Right, of your capability, of your ability to deal with adversity, to be resilient, any of those things. You are aligning yourself with a more loving, integrated, and a higher perspective of your own self. This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands, navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance.
All right. So you mentioned a principle of the universe is neutral. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that a little bit. You and I've talked about that, but I want to make sure that we're able to share to the audience. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I was told by a teacher a very long time ago, And I feel like I've lived lifetimes of trying to integrate that understanding into my life. Yeah. The universe is neutral assumes that if we, again, and this is depending on how people view, they have religious views, they have things like this. And I feel like this is a very flexible concept in this, in this thing. It does take away the vengeful God concept, right? If somebody has an idea that there's a vengeful God that wants you to learn and you have to suffer in order to be able to learn, we're kind of pulling back from that view. And we're basically saying, okay, if the universe is neutral, and perhaps it's neutral, you could also say the universe is love, it is working at all times to love you in the way that you can accept. Right? To reach into your life, right? And support whatever it is you feel you're worthy of. Right? And so that's kind of one aspect of this. But the more practical aspect says, okay, if the universe is neutral, my mind is the one that's judging this as good or bad. Right? And if I can take myself back a step, and instead of saying this is a bad thing or this is a good thing that came into my life, I'm actually just going to say that is my judgment. And if I want to get a much broader perspective, get better altitude, I'm going to say the universe is neutral. And then all of a sudden, my judgment becomes smaller. It becomes easier to overcome. It becomes something that isn't like, oh man, the universe is out to get me, or oh, this is the worst thing ever. I can't imagine. You're in your small self when you've judged something as bad and you're stuck in it.
Yeah, that's the victimization. In my own personal journey, I've learned a couple of things. One is that pain's inevitable when something happens externally, but suffering is optional. And the suffering comes from grabbing onto something, judging it, and saying, "Oh, this is horrible," and then going down this horrible path in your head and catastrophizing it, and then now you're focused on making it worse. And humans are like self-guided missiles. Your mind will take it to wherever you want to take it. Mm-hmm. And if you want to go down deep bad, you're going to go there. You create that reality. I never win anything is true. or I win all the time. That's also true. And so what I've learned is to not invest emotionally into what occurs, but to stay fixed on the outcome that I want. And to feel the gratitude and joy and jubilation for what that outcome will give me, and not get caught up in the circuitous path that sometimes we're presented with. For years, I read that you're supposed to focus on what you want to get out of the way. It didn't make any sense to me because I like action. I want to do things. And so I've come to the conclusion that you can take action. You can move forward to do something. You can just sit there waiting for it to show up. You don't sit there and say, oh, I'm going to win $1 million lottery ticket, so I'm just going to sit here and think about it. No, you got to take action. You got to go do something about it. But it's to take action without sort of forcing the path to speak of. It's more of, here's my bearing. It's like sailing. Here's my bearing. I can't control the winds. I can't control the currents. I can only control my sail and rudder. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to tack with optimism, no matter what's thrown in my way. And I'm always focused on where I want to end up. And then whatever shows up, I deal with it without being a victim of it. Kind of like the Stoics. It's not what happens. It's how you react and respond to it, where you have a choice, where we have free will. And it's not just a reaction. It's a choice. I choose a response regardless of how I may initially feel because of something that may have occurred. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. And I think that your interpretation of you need to think of something and then get out of the way, I feel like I've worked with a lot of people on this very concept. Because there's even this view in like enlightenment is like, oh, you're just going to now sit on a rock for the rest of your life. It's like, no, that's all I'm going to do. Let's just sit on a rock and not do anything. The people, there was this wonderful story of this man who was a teacher of Vipassana, which is a form of observational of sensations. Yeah. It's a form of Buddha's meditation. The man got very, very good at meditation, right? Like he was like, I totally get it. Like he became incredibly equanimous with what was happening. He understood the universe was neutral and he got rid of his craving or aversion, his judgments of whether it was good or bad. This man was a meditation teacher. He was in the Burmese government and he was in charge of one department, like one tiny little department. And then he got everybody in his department to start meditating, right? And then he was doing it as well. And then he just was able, like, he would get these cases in front of him and he would just look at it and he'd be like, got it, look at it, got it, look at it, got it, look at it, got it. And just be able, he was doing 10 times the work of anybody else. By the time this man retired, he was in charge of like 7 departments because, and he was incredibly active because his mind wasn't in a small state. He could see things from a different altitude to be able to say, oh, this is neutral. This isn't about me. I can see this within a totally objective mind because I have a strategy that is the most loving and integrated that I possibly can. I see that the universe is neutral, and therefore I'm able to act within that universe, right?
Yeah, that's great. No victim. You're an active participant, and you move forward with confidence and certainty.
Yeah, what you're moving out of the way is your anxiety about whether or not you're going to get it, or what it's like when you. That's what you're moving. You're moving out of the way all the attachments that your mind has to that outcome, because
the suffering, the catastrophe in your mind. You just don't even go there. Just something happened. No,
Exactly.
that's no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think as we continue the dialogue here, as I think about it, once that individual leader sort of gets to that state, they're defined their bigger self. The best of them shows up. They've aligned themselves with a greater sense of purpose and vision. Is to now bring that to your team, and be able to share that with confidence to say, okay, let's develop jointly. Not here's the stone tablets, go make it so, but jointly, what's our shared vision?
Yeah.
What do we want it to be, regardless of what the current circumstance may be? I mean, it may be, I use a lot of sports metaphors, and, years ago when the New England Patriots played Atlanta, they were down in the fourth quarter by over 20 points, and, they won. Brady won because he just said, doesn't matter what the scoreboard says, I know what I got to do. And he didn't focus on the emotion of I'm losing. He focused on what I got to do to win. That flipped the switch and then proceeded to do that. I don't know. It's like 4 touchdowns, 15 minutes. It was like unbelievable. And, I never played football. I'm not a football fanatic, but I can understand what happens when a team decides to not ignore the score, because you got to pay attention to the score, but not get caught up in what it may represent about them. They weren't in a state of fear. They said, we got this and we're going to move forward with confidence. And so, in a group organization, having the shared vision, understanding what your purpose is, recognizing what values you have, and then having that health to say with each other, I got your back, and I know you got my back. Now the team is aligned, and the old metaphors, everyone's rowing in the same direction. Well, they got to know that they're supposed to be rowing to begin with, right? And then be able to start going in whatever direction they have jointly agreed to it. And part of the process includes, because not everyone's going to agree, this is not about consensus building, is that sometimes you need to disagree and commit. Mm-hmm. You say, you know what, I don't quite see what everyone else sees, but because I trust you, I'm going to disagree, but I'm going to commit to support this effort as if it was my idea, 100%. I'm not going to sit on the sidelines. I'm not going to be sitting on the side going, neener, I told you so. I'm going to get in. And if we do it, the fact that everyone was right and I was wrong is irrelevant, because there is no judgment about that. And if it fails, I won't say, oh, I told you so. It's something was missing that we failed to take into account at the beginning. And I think this alignment at a group level is very, very, very powerful. And I always tell people, tell me how many employees you have. Let's say they have 1,000. That's to me is a small company. And there's 10 leaders. I said, well, if only 10% of you are moving in the direction you want to move in, it's not enough. You got to figure out a way to get the other 900 engaged. And that means you got to go out there and talk to them. You got to give them the shared vision. You have to let them feel like they're participating in it. Because I'd rather have 900 people moving in the same direction, only have 100 people who are opposing it, because I'll win. And in every turnaround we've done, it's always been because you engage all the employees. It's not just select few at the top. It's every employee in the organization saying, I believe in what this company stands for. I believe in its purpose. And my expression of that in my job brings out the best in me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so much freedom in commitment. And then when you align everybody to do it, that's exactly right. Like, I'm curious, when it comes to like, I feel like we're going to have to unpack this more, because I want to hear more about like, how is it that you can, I think in balance and coherence, we're going to see a little bit more about like, how do you actually get everybody aligned with that vision? How do you get them excited about it? How do you get them, I feel like I'm curious about that too.
Yeah. Well, one is to reach them where they're at.
Yeah.
I've run restaurant companies. I've worked in technology companies. I've worked in food manufacturing. And there's always layers and levels of people, the people at the top, people at the middle, people at the bottom. And I go to the people at the bottom. When I started my career in business, I started as an hourly worker, I think making a buck and a quarter an hour. I've never forgotten that. And I've always learned that, I saw how I was treated. Some people treated me terribly. Others treated me with respect and gave me a helping hand. But what I did learn is to have some form of aspiration. I mean, when you're at a low-paying job, and let's face it, when someone says, "Oh, the living wage in this city is $19 an hour," well, my God, that's not a living wage. That's a survival wage. With the inflation and stuff we've gone through, who can live on less than $40,000 a year and raise a family in a major metropolitan area? It's not possible. And so if we can convince them that if they help us, they can give us what I always say, give us the opportunity to reward you, and we will increase your wages. When I ran this bakery in Atlanta, when I first got there, they're making $8.50 an hour. When I stopped being the CEO, though I remain on the board, the average wage per hour was $19, including overtime. That's a big difference. I had salespeople who didn't make $90,000 a year. This year, a couple of them are going to make over $350,000 a year. That's when you're leapfrogging it, because it comes from a growth mindset. And that growth mindset is so important to have, and to give people hope and a higher vision of what they can achieve with life, because they're just working for their families. That's all they're really doing. And that's okay. And we want them aligned with what we're doing as a business to say, as we grow as a business, we are going to reward you to show you that you can grow with us. And that is the most powerful thing in the world. That's how you get them engaged. And the money's important, but the intrinsic reward that I can make a difference and that I matter and that I'm impacting this business, that's the moonshot that everyone talks about, right? The old thing about the janitor at NASA thought he was helping people get to the moon as he was sweeping the floors and taking out the trash. And he was. And the same thing happens in all those other jobs. So there's no individual that is insignificant or less important than anybody else. It's just a different role. And so that engagement is the part that I've always worked on. It's an emotional issue. You're managing emotions. And it is about hope. It is about aspirations and making sure that people see it. And not everyone will. And with all due respect, I always tell them, I believe everyone should be successful. And sometimes you need to be successful somewhere else. If you cannot align with what we want, because we only want people who are aligned, who've got our backs, and we're going to support them in that regard. And that's a very powerful thing. And I'll share a brief story with you. When I took over this bakery, and it was challenged. We bought it 2 weeks before COVID hit, and sales immediately dropped, like 60%. And everyone's working in masks, and a bakery in Atlanta in the summer is about 105 degrees in there because of all the ovens. And it was just not fun. It was a very dark place. It wasn't well lit. We had a small, like a lunchroom that I couldn't get more than 3 people in because you can't be, the 6 foot distance. Remember that whole thing, the social distance? Yeah. It was tough. But I always go in there and meet with the workforce, a lot of females, see how they're doing, what do you need? And I repaired floors. I got new tables. I got new microwaves because I had a general meeting with all the leadership and them. And I told the employees, the way that these managers take care of your work area, your break area, and your general work environment is a direct reflection of what they think about you. And the manager's eyes got big. And I said, that's true. And I worked hard to make sure that their work area, their break area, everything was the best it could be given the circumstance. And I'll never forget, I walked into the break room and I asked the ladies, how's it going? Is everything working? Because I got them in your refrigerator and a freezer and I got microwaves and everything like that. And they said, everything's fine. But this one lady said, I want to tell you something. She goes, God sent you to help us. And you have. And because of that, we're going to help you. And I got very emotional. I didn't expect that. It was just so heartfelt from a person, again, making very little money. Someone could say insignificant, but to me, that was one of the highest compliments I've ever been paid in my life because she recognized that. And we touched each other as humans. And so that's how you get people engaged. You're authentic, you're transparent, you share your vision, and you invite them along for the ride.
Right. And that aligns with the principle of conscious capitalism, right? And this understanding of stakeholders and like the fact that all of your stakeholders are important. And therefore you need to pay attention and nurture everybody in that environment. And then you see the same thing in a person. Person will have multiple different competing principles and things like that. And you got to sometimes get to the lowest of them to actually get everything in the system aligned, right? To be able to be like, oh, the universe is neutral, but I have all these other thoughts that say that's definitely not the case. And you got to get everybody on board, right? Everybody on board with what? And that happens through practice and through going through it, right? Yeah.
Right. And as we've discussed, the personality, all the strengths and weaknesses, limitations of the leader's personality become an imprint on the culture. And so therefore, you got to be paying attention, because whatever blind side we have, it's showing up in the culture somewhere, somehow. If you have if it's a toxic culture, that goes without saying, it's bad. But if you have a culture where you're not facing reality, or you're not focused on making sure that people are informed, so the financial literacy is low, that becomes an issue in that regard. And I always say that my metaphor for culture is a swimming pool. And we're all standing in a swimming pool, and everyone's job is to keep the water pure and clean. Therefore, there is no peeing section in the swimming pool. You cannot allow that. Everyone has responsibility. And when you start empowering people to see that they have as much say in what goes on and how it goes on as the CEO has, that's a great organization. But they can come up to you and just let you know what's really going on. What can be better? And anytime anyone ever said to me that something was broken, bam, I got that fixed fast, as fast as I could, because I wanted to show them that they mattered. And they did. I mean, they absolutely did, because without them, we could not survive COVID and grown the business as dramatically as we grew it.
Yep. It's this amazing thing. So we've talked about the personal, we talked about the business. Now, what are some more principles? We talked about the universe is neutral as one of those kind of key principles that it's like, let's see if we can, this is a limitless belief. If you can match yourself to this, then this is an amazing thing. What would be your next favorite principle, like universal principle?
Well, I think the shared vision. I mean, the vision is important. I always tell people a vision is like a movie in your mind. What do you want it to be? The old classic experiment, imagine a lemon, and you get your glands and your sides of your mouth starts secreting. Because in your mind's eye, can't separate something that's out here in our four-dimensional world from inside the mind's eye. So the vision is in the mind's eye. What do we want to look like in 3 to 5 years? Let's describe it. How big are we going to be? How many employees? What are our sales going to be? What are our profits? What is it going to feel like? And it's all about emotion, too. It's all about emotion. Emotion is what drives humans to achieve what they want to achieve that they thought was difficult. The mind visualizes it in the mind's eye, but it's an open heart and the emotion, the passion, the support, the commitment that really puts wind in the sails. I talked about the rudder and the sails, as Khalil Gibran talks about. The sails is where your passion fills the sails, and the rudder is where reason guides it. And that's what it's all about. And celebrating small victories so that you reinforce that. So that shared vision after you're in alignment is really, really critical, because anytime you make a choice, it's that taking us to our shared vision. And it helps people to think more strategically, to say, think 2 to 3 years out when you make a decision. Don't limit yourself to what's immediately in front of you. Don't look at your feet when you're walking. Look up, look high, look far out, and have that shared vision. And then if you have a purpose, and the purpose goes beyond just making money. Simon Sinek did a beautiful job on TED Talks explaining that, much better than I could. But he's absolutely right. That purpose is so important, to say that what we're here to achieve goes above and beyond just the money we make. That's just an outcome. It's a way of keeping score. And if you're changing the world in some significant way, or just changing one person's life, then that's your purpose, and then you find what it is. And part of what we do is help people find their purpose within organizations. When we do workshops, we go through the process, say, okay, what is our purpose? How do we define our business? And aspirationally, how do we rise above what people think we do? A lot of the times, the mechanics of what one does has nothing to do with your purpose. Your purpose is so much higher than that. And I think that's what I have discovered is so powerful, that aspirational view to say what we are doing is so much more significant than what it appears to be on the surface. And you've got your systems and processes and P&Ls and roles and all that kind of stuff, and that's great. But boy, when you've got a group of people that are energized because they're moved, sort of that spiritual intelligence where it moves through you and it embodies the culture and everyone can feel victory, That's what does it. I think so. That's an important part. I mean, the alignment, and also again, I think the correspondence that what happens to the individual happens to the culture is another one, right? As above, so below.
Yep.
That's a universal law. So the three big ones we thought today is, the universe is neutral. You have the law of correspondence, and there's also this power of a shared vision that it becomes your guide, your bearing of where you want to get to, regardless of circumstances and changing conditions, that you can move through with confidence and with grace as you're allowed to try and do that. Those are the ones that I have found to be very, very powerful. I mean, there's others, such as be kind.
Yep.
Don't be nice, be kind, because nice people want people to like them, and they seek, adulation and stuff like that. And that's not good in a leader. You want to be kind. Always treat people with respect and courtesy and dignity, but hold them accountable. You got to have tough love and recognize that your stewardship is to the greater good. It's not to a few individuals. It's the entire organization. And once in a while, some individuals may have to go because either they're not in alignment with you, so that's easy, or business circumstances has changed and you have to pivot. You got to make an adjustment. And that's how it works. It's sad, but that's how it works. But that can be very liberating for the individual. If you do it right and treat them with dignity and respect and give them a soft landing, they may end up in a better place. And that's important to understand that. You have to have the belief that really exists.
Yeah, and that's an extension of the universe is neutral, right? Is this understanding that if you're going to project what you think is going to happen to this person, you are affecting that person. And you are affecting how they are going to take it. It could be the most amazing thing in the world for them to lose their job. It's not like we're assuming that's the case, right? But I think that there's a lot to be said for the fact that we recognize that we are relatively solipsistic beings. We kind of have an understanding of the world as we perceive it, and we don't understand the ebbs and flows and moves of another person, right? Like we're seeking that, but ultimately we are all, bodies that are moving in our own waves, in our own, going through our own lessons and going through our own experience, and we can't be responsible for. I mean, that's a classic rescuer. I'm totally responsible for making making something that says that everyone's going to be protected. It's like, but that's your view of protection. That's right. That's coming from your limited belief that the world is unsafe, and that therefore you can kind of control what that looks like, right?
Great point. I agree with that. I'd say that to our audience, reach out to us. On our email address is growth@theexecutiveandthemystic.com, and see if you have any questions. I mean, Kristina is a wealth of knowledge of what you as an individual can do to align yourself with higher principles and deal with your inner demons, your shadow self, your villain, as you're trying to move through this, because we're humans. And I clearly have a lot of exercises and experience in helping teams move through this. So in balance with each other, because everyone's an individual at a table, right? And what makes a team is individuals choosing a common purpose and a common goal with a shared vision. That's what becomes powerful to try and do. And we are available to help answer that for you. And if you send any emails to us and say, hey, this would be really interesting to explore further, we will take the time in one of our podcasts to explore these certain ideas even with greater detail than maybe we have today. We're still sort of in the introductory phase of going from the high level of the ABCs to now the A. And then our next episode, we're going to talk about balance, which has a whole very different dynamic than alignment. And then, of course, obviously, we will also go to coherence, and we'll go on well beyond that. We could talk about this stuff for hours. So we appreciate you taking time today and joining us and sharing with us our dialogue and conversation, and look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Have a great day.